Welcome to Eerie Bites of History, your daily serving of strange bites of the past. Today, we have a flood of beer, a hijacking that gripped the world, and vengeance for a fallen monarch, all of which happened on October 17th. Let's begin. On October 17th, 1814, London awoke to a disaster so strange, so surreal, that it sounded like a drunken nightmare. In the heart of the city, at Mew & Company's Horseshoe Brewery, a massive iron vat holding more than 600,000 liters of dark porter suddenly burst. The sound was deafening, the crack like a thunder inside a cathedral. Within seconds, the neighboring vats collapsed one after another. A tsunami of beer tore through the streets of St. Giles. The wave, nearly 15 feet high, smashed through brick walls, swept up carts, and crushed everything in its path. People were thrown from their feet, trapped in cellars, and buried in debris. At a nearby wake, mourners were suddenly drowned, not by rain or river, but by the very drink they had gathered to share. Witnesses say the air smelled of hops and iron. Some thought the world was ending, that God himself had sent a punishment disguised as porter. Finally, the flooding stilled, 8 souls were dead. The streets glistened with a brown foam in silence. The brewery survived, but the neighborhood never truly recovered. Even now, some say on damp London nights, if the wind is right, you can still catch the scent of spilt beer and hear the faint rush of the flood that came from nowhere. London never seems to be short on strange tales, but a tidal wave of beer? That's the kind of disaster that feels more like a butt end of a joke than a real event. One that the city never quite laughed off. On October 17th, 1660, the air in London was thick with rain and smoke and retribution. The monarchy had returned, and with it, vengeance. 9 men stood condemned of regicide, those who had dared to sign the death warrant for King Charles I. They had toppled the crown, and now they were about to pay for it in blood. Dragged through the mud to the gallows, their names were read out loud to a jeering crowd. Some prayed, others stayed silent, their eyes hollow, lips trembling. They had lived years in hiding, shrouded by secret networks, whispered codes, and safe houses only lit by candlelight. But there was no more hiding. Only the ropes waited. As the first man was hanged, a sudden gust tore through the square. By day's end, 9 bodies displayed as a warning to those who would defy the crown again. Yet many whispered that the punishment had unleashed a curse, that strange storms and unexplained deaths haunted those who'd watched. Even now, some say the old scaffolding site is colder than the rest of London. And if you stand there at night, you might just hear the faint rattle of chains and the final breath of those who dared to kill a king. It's easy to call them traitors or even martyrs, depending on who you ask. Maybe the real horror is how quickly justice turns into a spectacle when the crowd demands a show. On October 17th, 1977, a Boeing 737 drifted through the African night, its passengers silent, its fate uncertain. The plane finally landed at its final stop. For days, Flight 181 had been a prison in the sky, hijacked by armed militants. Their demand: release the imprisoned Red Army faction members from back west in Germany. Their message: fear broadcasted across the continents. The plane wandered around like a ghost, touching down in Rome, Cyprus, Brahim, Dubai, and finally, Somalia. Inside, the air was thick with terror, food had run out, the scent of fuel hung heavy. Passengers whispered prayers into the dark, listening for footsteps that might have been their salvation or death. The hijackers were growing desperate, twitchy, and unpredictable. The captain, Jürgen Schumann, had already been executed. His blood soaked the floor where frightened travelers still sat. Then, just before dawn of the next day, the shadows descended on the runway. The elite German GSG-9, with Somali support, crept towards the aircraft under the cover of night. At precisely 2:07 a.m., explosions shattered the silence, flash grenades, shouts, and chaos. In less than 5 minutes it was over, and the hostages were free. The hijackers were dead, and it was called Operation Fire Magic, a victory for the modern age. When the smoke cleared, 3 of the hijackers were dead, and an ordeal the hostages would never forget. The rescue was a success, and when news of the rescue reached Germany, 3 prominent leaders of the Red Army faction were found dead in their cells, and 1 in critical condition, leaving even more questions. Like your history snack-sized? Drop us a comment with your favorite bite and subscribe. Join us daily for your eerie dose of the past.